I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elise Sharp.
And we are two Shakespeare nerds who decided to make a podcast about our love for Shakespeare.
In this podcast, we will tackle as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which it was written, and how the text is viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as actors, how his plays can be responsibly performed today.
All while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to bardolatry. So, Shakespeare, anyone? Hi, listeners. Elise here to remind you of all the ways you can support the podcast and the work that Courtney and I do. First up, we have a Patreon. Our Patreon patrons receive exclusive bonus content. Every month, we do a roundup of Shakespeare-related content we have found online. We also share Patreon-exclusive bonus episodes of the podcast. These look like extended versions of episodes you've heard here, collaborations with other Shakespeare podcasters, and Courtney and I doing reviews of Shakespeare-adjacent media like TV shows, movies, and books that are inspired by or loosely based on Shakespeare and Shakespeare plays. Patreon patrons also receive snail mail from the podcast, and some levels even vote on future episodes of our podcast. If you are interested in checking out our Patreon, or just the Shakespeare-related names we've given the tiers of support, head to patreon.com/ShakespeareAnyone. The link is also in our episode description. After you've done that, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your review might even make it on an episode. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and tell a friend. Word of mouth is our best form of advertising. Thank you so much for all of the support you give the podcast. Now, on to the episode.
Welcome to another Shakespeare Anyone mini-episode. In these mini-episodes, we'll be exploring topics that are related to Shakespeare but aren't necessarily connected to whatever play we've been discussing.
And they're mini because, well, they're shorter than our other episodes. They're like quartos if the regular episodes are folio editions.
In today's Thanksgiving mini-episode, we'll be discussing postcolonial theory in Shakespeare. This episode is a continuation of our Intro to Postcolonial Theory, this time focusing on intercultural and global Shakespeare in both scholarship and performance.
And as Courtney continues writing these episodes, she acknowledges that the study of postcolonial theory in Shakespeare is so vast that we still need to cover this topic as a mini-series. Subsequent episodes will discuss the colonization of Ireland, anti-Semitism in The Merchant of Venice, racism in Othello, the aftermath of colonialism, and, of course, postcolonial performance, past and present.
In addition to our mini-series, we will dive deeper into this topic during our The Tempest, Othello, and Merchant of Venice series, respectively.
The reason we are releasing this episode on or around Thanksgiving is because we believe in deconstructing and decolonizing our readings of, as we have said for 4 years, this old white dude, William Shakespeare. Art is not created in a vacuum. People create the art we consume for a reason. So, let's re-examine the Renaissance man through colonialism.
We also want to acknowledge Jyotsna G. Singh's 2019 book, Shakespeare and Postcolonial Theory, published by Art and Shakespeare, as our primary source today. And, as we will be discussing colonialism, we will cover topics that may be triggering for some people. Please listen with care.
But first, here is a quick refresher. During Thanksgiving 2021, we discussed the colonial imagination. To sum up that mini-episode, early modern England's colonial imagination was a result of trade and sea exploration made possible by an emerging British Empire. While Shakespeare didn't participate in proto-colonial activities directly, he and his plays might have been influenced by the travel writers who were documenting their travels, as well as the people they encountered abroad.
During Thanksgiving 2022, we discussed how mercantilism complicated early modern identity by labeling foreigners and immigrants others, while also consuming their material culture. In addition to the material, a postcolonial lens allows us to imagine Shakespearean audiences as cosmopolitan and worldly, enjoying imaginings, good or bad, about Africans, Middle Easterners, and Indians.
And during Thanksgiving 2023, we discussed how the key imperative of postcolonial theory is to question and reinvent the way in which a culture or society is represented, especially within the histories of colonialism. One early iteration of this was the Decolonize the Mind movement from the 1950s to 70s, which saw writers dismantle and reassemble the Shakespearean text in radical ways in order to expose the colonial value system and represent colonized voices who were speaking back in Shakespeare.
This analysis of Shakespeare is crucial, given these plays are still performed to this day.
Go back and listen if you haven't already.
So, now that we've covered our bases, let's dive in.
Decolonizing the mind helps transform ideas, but postcolonial theory should also be put into practice through making change in all aspects of society. And one of those changes is how Shakespeare's plays can be interpreted and performed in a postcolonial society.
This practice involves shifting our perceptions of Shakespeare's plays as timeless and universal to timely and particular, especially in the context of performance. Now, we are not out here trying to totally rid Shakespeare of this claim of universality. More so, we mean as more and more people from more and more nationalities and backgrounds produce his plays, we should ask, why this play and why now? Who is producing this play? Who is on the stage playing these characters? What interpretive choices are being made? Where is this play being performed? These are all questions we invite all to ask as we apply this framework to our own scholarship and theater practice.
In this year's postcolonial theory episode, we are going to discuss a few postcolonial readings and performances from both Western and Global Shakespeare scholars and practitioners. We did a similar version of this last year when we discussed the Al-Kasaba Theater Academy in Ramallah's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, directed by Samer Al-Saber and featuring its student actors. Please go back and listen to that episode after you've listened to this one. It's an important example of this work.
First, let's explore Shakespeare's role in Johannesburg, South Africa in 1996. Singh begins this chapter with an anecdote from her own experience at the international conference Shakespeare Postcoloniality that took place at the University of Witwatersrand in 1996. According to Singh, quote, what became increasingly apparent was that when joined with postcoloniality, interpretations of Shakespeare's works emerged from varied subject positions responding to different material conditions, unquote. On the one hand, there were academics questioning whether there should even be a conference on Shakespeare and postcoloniality, quote, given the uses to which Shakespeare's writings have been put throughout the history of English/British imperialism, unquote. But on the other hand, there were political activists validating Shakespeare in former colonies. Hugh Lewin, a South African resistance member, political prisoner, and speaker, recalled that he and other prisoners would participate in makeshift productions of Shakespeare while in apartheid prison. For him, quote, Shakespeare's theatrical works had offered them powerful illusions of rebellion in a world of rigid boundaries and limits, unquote.
Singh then discusses how this question from the conference has inspired scholars to take postcolonial and hybridized perspectives on some of Shakespeare's plays that are not usually associated with these themes. First, Nicholas Visser's reading of King Lear in his article Postcoloniality of a Special Type, Theory and Its Appropriations in South Africa, quote, intertwined struggles for land and ownership in early modern England and in post-apartheid South Africa, unquote. Visser overlaps both inequities of both race and class due to the specificity of the colonial historical reading.
Second, Willie Malley's Postcolonial Shakespeare, British Identity Formation and Cymbeline historicized British nationalism through Cymbeline's context of quote-unquote Romanness. And last, Martin Orkin's book, Local Shakespeares, Power and Proximation, views Cymbeline through, quote, male accountability in attempts at reconciliation, truth-telling, and peaceful compromise, unquote. Orkin's histories include an intertextual reading of Joshua Sobel's play, The Palestinian Girl, and Israel's occupation of Palestine, as well as South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Committee. However, both Malley and Orkin's readings do not examine gender ideologies within these readings.
Now, let's go ahead and move on from scholarly texts to postcolonial performance.
First, Singh uses Fiser's framework to examine Antony and Cleopatra, specifically the Royal Shakespeare Company's 2017 production directed by Iqbal Khan and starring Jyotsna Simon. This production was notable because of its multi-layer exploration of Egypt and Rome, merging postcolonial theory with race theory. So let's talk about Simon's Cleopatra. As a Black British actor, Simon, quote, connects to the intersections of race, sexuality, gender, and empire, and in terms of performance history, to the challenges of multiracial, non-traditional casting, unquote. And this is important because Cleopatra's racial identity continues to be a point of debate that influences casting. On the Jacobean stage, Cleopatra would have been played by a young British man in brownface. And historically, there is a long list of white Cleopatras like Vivian Leigh.
But these cultural and racial anachronisms of casting white Cleopatras signals different cultural expectations compared to casting Black or non-white Cleopatras. Singh writes that, quote, the issue of Cleopatra's racial origins is woven into the play via her identification with Egypt, a source of darkness, fecundity, and a primal place of origins, unquote. Additionally, Cleopatra is recognized, quote, as an Orientalist icon who has been coded in Western eyes to strengthen the European self by distinguishing itself from the Orient, unquote. Therefore, Cleopatra embodies a racialized, colonized, and feminized construction by imperialism and patriarchy. So, postcolonial perspectives, quote, recognize how Cleopatra has been produced as a racialized Orientalist icon both within the play and beyond, unquote. Luckily, there have been many more Black Cleopatras on the stage since the 1980s and 90s.
Let's bring it back to the 2017 RSC Cleopatra, Jyotsna Simon. Simon received accolades and admiration for her performance. However, many of the same reviewers also responded to her performance, quote, with racialized and gendered inflections, whereby even positive comments seem to fall back on stereotypes of exotic women of color, unquote. For example, one review described her performance as, quote, a fantastically schizophrenic performance, from playful kitten to lacerating lion, unquote. In contrast, Simon described her Cleopatra as, quote, as much a player in the political narrative as Octavius or Antony. We forget this woman has a mind. One of the attractions for Antony is not just the sex and the passion, but a meeting of minds, which can be very, very sexy, unquote.
Now, let's go beyond Western, usually American and British, Shakespeare, to explore intercultural encounters that are often called the global Shakespeare movement. Singh writes that these, quote, Shakespearean travels expand into varied spaces and historical moments, often engaging with the local, the vernacular, and the liminal, unquote. Think Bollywood Shakespeare, Arab Shakespeare, or Asian Shakespeare, among many others. These intercultural Shakespeares are both timely and specific.
In China, a 1942 Hamlet, directed by Zhao Juyin, was performed in a Confucian temple in Zhong'an while China was at war with Imperial Japan. Because of the setting of the temple and the political circumstances, this Hamlet developed a political life full of patriotic spirit during wartime. In contrast, Ong Kang-sen's Lear from 1997 was a multilingual adaptation that adapted both Shakespearean and multinational Asian identity within a postmodernist allegorical frame. According to Professor Alexa Huang, quote, seen afar from the European perspective, the contrasts between the Asian languages and styles were flattened by their similarities. However, seen from an Asian perspective, the difference between Asian cultures was accentuated by the performance, unquote.
In India, director Salim Gauss's production of Hamlet created a postcolonial paradox as part of a movement of what Paramita Kapadia calls Jyotsna Shakespeare. Jyotsna is an ancient Indian, Bengali theatrical tradition that is important to Indian folk theatre. The paradox arises when Gauss merged a pre-colonial Indian theatre tradition with the colonial theatre tradition of Shakespeare. Quote, in Kapadia's analysis, she describes the rift between the colonial and familiar language of the play, and the Jyotsna traditions that privilege the visual and the physical over the spoken and oral, unquote.
Arab Shakespeare allows directors to explore global politics through appropriation and adaptation of the original source material. For example, Vishal Bardwaj, director of Heder, or Hamlet, said, quote, it's about the politics behind humanity, their emotions and their conflicts. I was not burdened with Shakespeare's name. Western films are so conscious of Shakespeare's work that they don't rise beyond it. I always remain very true to the soul of the play, rather than the text. Unquote.
In fact, Shakespeare was often introduced to many of these countries through other countries. For example, Hamlet was brought to Egypt by a Syrian immigrant's version of Alexander Dumas' Hamlet. And Shakespeare gained popularity in Egypt in the 1960s, following Grigory Kozintsev's Soviet-era Gamlet. Mahmoud al-Shatawi sums up Arab Shakespeare in three aspects. Quote, as mimicry and admiration of Shakespeare as being part of a world culture, as anti-colonial ripostes, or as representations of the political dilemmas of their own times, unquote. Suleiman al-Bassam's The Arab Shakespeare Trilogy, three plays, the Al-Hamlet Summit, Richard III, An Arab Tragedy, and The Speaker's Progress, Twelfth Night, does just that, create new meanings and historical relevance. Quote, the plays are informed and inflected by concerns, issues, and events pertaining to my perception of the Arab world during the first decade of the 21st century, unquote.
And now that, as Singh puts it, the singular Englishness of Shakespearean drama has disrupted, there are further explorations in identity, race, and theatrical practice in intercultural settings back in the Western world. The experiences of migration, diaspora, and multiculturalism is allowing for bold choices that go beyond traditional performance.
The 2015 RSC version of Othello, directed by Iqbal Khan, cast a black actor as Iago, and this cross-racial casting provides a new series of questions for the play. How are racist stereotypes not reinforced with this casting choice? Has another racist aspect been added to the play? These are questions we on the podcast also ask in our work.
Multicultural Shakespeare's in a Multicultural England additionally allows theater practitioners to reimagine the worlds of these plays. For example, Tim Supple's 2007 Midsummer with Dash Arts imagined a multilingual, global, and cross-cultural India, quote, aiming to appeal to eyes and hearts rather than ears and minds, unquote. Emma Rice's 2016 Midsummer at the Globe was a cross-cultural India that combined hallucination and truth that, according to Singh, quote, makes us rethink any naturalized associations between the Shakespearean plot and a purely Anglo culture, unquote. And Iqbal Khan's 2012 Much Ado at the RSC, set in modern Delhi, explored how this locale's social hierarchies and expectations are similar to that of Shakespeare's England. Although, unlike the two Midsummers, Khan's Much Ado received some poor reviews by reviewers who accused the play of not being really Indian. Quote, second-generation British actors are pretending to return to their cultural roots in a decidedly colonial way, unquote. Singh points out that this British theater critic's review reflects their own expectations of a Bollywood India that looks more like those Midsummers than the lived experiences of a modern Delhi.
That's all the time we have today. So, to sum up this episode, in a post-colonial world, Shakespeare's plays can and should be read and performed through multicultural and multinational times and places that add new meanings to his works and help us answer the crucial question, why Shakespeare? Why now?
Before we let you go, if you choose to celebrate Thanksgiving, we have some suggestions for celebrating the holiday that we hope makes you feel less icky. First, unlearn revisionist history and learn real history. Then discuss this history with your family and your friends.
Second, donate to your local tribe, either money, resources, or your time. Third, support Native activists and become an ally. Get involved in restorative justice and diversify your feed by following Native activists, organizations, and artists. Fourth, and finally, support Native businesses, art, and academia. Today, we recommend listening to the All My Relations podcast episode, Thanks-Taking or Thanksgiving.
And please support global Indigenous rights and land back movements from America to Palestine to Aotearoa and everywhere in between.
Thank you for listening to this episode.
I'm Courtney Smith.
And I'm Elise Sharp.
This is Shakespeare, anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare, anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Never Ending Minute by Sounds Like Sander. If you would like to support us, it would help us out if you would hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it.
You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/ShakespeareAnyone.
Patreon patrons get access to exclusive bonus content throughout the year. The link is also in the episode description.
For more, you can visit our website, ShakespeareAnyone.com, follow us on Instagram at ShakespeareAnyonePod, or Twitter at ShakespeareAnyone. For Twitter, that's Shakespeare, Any, and the number 1. Every other platform is spelled out like the name of the podcast.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here's a completely random Shakespeare quote for you.
From As You Like It, Act 3, Scene 2, said by Rosalind. A lean cheek, which you have not, a blue eye and sunken, which you have not, an unquestionable spirit, which you have not, a beard neglected, which you have not. But I pardon you for that, for simply your having in beard is a younger brother's revenue.